Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more mysterious disappearances and unsolved cases. This is the story of a 12-year-old boy named Ethan Winters, a bright, curious 6th grader from the small town of Pinecrest, who vanished during a school field trip to the Lakeside Natural History Museum. What began as an ordinary spring day in May would transform into one family's worst nightmare, a community's deepest mystery, and a case that would baffle investigators for months to come. Ethan was last seen by his classmates near the museum's butterfly garden around 2:15 p.m., but when the students gathered to board the buses at 3 p.m., Ethan was nowhere to be found. The immediate search yielded nothing. No sightings, no evidence, no explanation for how a child could simply disappear from a crowded museum surrounded by teachers, chaperones, and security cameras. It was as if Ethan had been plucked from existence, leaving behind only questions and a devastated family desperate for answers. For 8 long months, the search for Ethan continued, growing colder with each passing day, until an unexpected discovery breathed new life into the investigation. A child's blue winter jacket found by hikers in Blackwater National Forest, nearly 300 miles from where Ethan had disappeared. The jacket, confirmed by his parents to be Ethan's, raised more questions than it answered. How did it get there? Was Ethan still alive? And who would take a child across state lines into the remote wilderness? The discovery of the jacket would set in motion a chain of events that would lead investigators down a dark and twisted path, one that would ultimately reveal a truth more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As we piece together the events of Ethan's disappearance and the shocking discovery of his jacket, we will explore not only the facts of the case but also the profound impact it had on a family that refused to give up hope, a community forever changed by the loss of one of its youngest members, and the relentless determination of those who sought justice for a boy who vanished without a trace. The morning of May 15th began like any other day for the Winters family. Sarah Winters, a nurse at the local hospital, prepared breakfast while her husband James, a high school science teacher, helped their son Ethan gather his things for the field trip. Ethan had been looking forward to this excursion for weeks. An avid science enthusiast with a particular fascination for insects, he had been talking non-stop about the museum's butterfly garden. He wore his favorite blue winter jacket despite the mild spring weather, insisting he might get cold inside the air-conditioned museum. Sarah would later recall how she tried to persuade him to leave it at home, but ultimately relented when Ethan stubbornly zipped it up and declared himself ready. It was the last time she would see her son wearing that jacket, the last normal moment before their lives shattered. The Lakeside Natural History Museum was located about 40 minutes from Pinecrest Elementary, and the 6th grade class arrived shortly after 10 a.m. Mrs. Patterson, Ethan's teacher, would later tell investigators that nothing seemed unusual that morning. The children were excited but well-behaved as they moved through the dinosaur exhibit, the geological wonders section, and finally to the butterfly garden that Ethan had been so eager to see. Security footage from the museum showed Ethan with his friends, his expression one of wonder as colorful butterflies fluttered around the tropical plants. At approximately 2:15 p.m., Ethan told his friend Tyler that he needed to use the restroom. Tyler would later tell police that he offered to go with Ethan, but Ethan insisted he'd be quick and would meet him back at the exhibit. This was the last confirmed sighting of Ethan Winters. When the students began gathering to return to school at 3 p.m., Mrs. Patterson noticed Ethan's absence during the head count. Initially assuming he was still in the restroom, she sent a chaperone to check. When this yielded no results, the museum was alerted, and a systematic search began. Security guards checked every bathroom, exhibit, and storage area. The museum was placed on lockdown as staff reviewed security footage, but inexplicably there was no sign of Ethan leaving the building. Yet he was nowhere inside either. The police were called at 3:45 p.m. By 4:30 p.m., Sarah and James Winters had arrived at the museum, their faces pale with fear as officers explained the situation. By nightfall, the search had expanded to include K9 units and a helicopter with thermal imaging. News vans lined the museum parking lot as the disappearance of Ethan Winters became the leading story across the state. But despite the extensive search, the deployment of multiple resources, and the scrutiny of every frame of security footage, Ethan had vanished without a trace. The days following Ethan's disappearance were a blur of police interviews, press conferences, and sleepless nights for the Winters family. Sarah took an indefinite leave from her nursing job, unable to focus on anything but finding her son. James continued teaching, partly out of financial necessity and partly because staying busy was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. Their younger daughter, 8-year-old Emma, struggled to understand why her brother wasn't coming home, her innocent questions driving daggers into her parents' hearts. The investigation quickly revealed troubling gaps in the museum's security. Despite its modern appearance, several security cameras had been malfunctioning that day, creating blind spots in the coverage. Most critically, the camera overlooking the east exit near the butterfly garden had been offline for maintenance, which meant there was no visual record of whether Ethan had left through those doors, voluntarily or otherwise. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. The police interviewed everyone present at the museum that day: staff, visitors, the school group. They scrutinized the backgrounds of museum employees and systematically eliminated most as potential suspects. There was one person of interest, a maintenance worker named Carl Dawson, who had been scheduled to repair the east exit camera but had called in sick that day. When police went to question him at his apartment, they discovered he had abruptly quit his job and moved out 2 days after Ethan's disappearance. This led to a statewide alert for Dawson, but he seemed to have vanished almost as completely as Ethan himself. The following weeks brought an outpouring of support for the Winters family. Volunteers distributed flyers with Ethan's photo across the region. A Facebook group dedicated to finding Ethan quickly grew to over 50,000 members. Anonymous donors contributed to a reward fund that eventually reached $100,000 for information leading to Ethan's return. The initial media frenzy gradually subsided, but Sarah refused to let her son's case fade from public consciousness. She gave interviews, organized search parties, and maintained a daily blog documenting the ongoing efforts to find Ethan. Her determination was fueled by an unshakable belief that her son was still alive somewhere, waiting to be found. James channeled his grief differently, becoming obsessed with the investigation itself. He created a detailed timeline on their living room wall, mapping out every known detail of Ethan's last day, searching for patterns or clues that might have been missed. He spent hours researching similar cases, corresponding with private investigators, and following up on even the most implausible leads. While they presented a united front in public, privately, the strain began to take its toll on their marriage. Sarah clung to hope with a fervor that sometimes bordered on denial, while James increasingly prepared himself for the worst possible outcome. Their different coping mechanisms created a gulf between them just when they needed each other most. As summer turned to fall, the active investigation gradually slowed. The FBI, which had joined the case due to the possibility of a kidnapping across state lines, maintained that it remained open, but resources were inevitably diverted to more recent cases. Leads had dried up. Carl Dawson, the maintenance worker, had been located in Nevada and thoroughly questioned, but his alibi for the day of the disappearance checked out. The police were back to square one. For the Winters family, the approaching holiday season brought a new dimension of pain. How could they celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas with an empty chair at the table? With Ethan's favorite ornaments left in their box? Sarah wanted to preserve everything exactly as it had been, as if Ethan might walk through the door at any moment. James thought it might be healthier, especially for Emma, to find ways to honor Ethan's memory while still allowing themselves moments of joy. These philosophical differences led to their first major argument since the disappearance, a heated exchange that ended with Sarah sleeping in Ethan's bed, clinging to a stuffed dinosaur that still carried his scent. The first significant breakthrough in the case came exactly 8 months after Ethan's disappearance, on a cold January afternoon. 2 hikers exploring a remote trail in Blackwater National Forest, nearly 300 miles from Pinecrest, spotted something blue among the winter-bare branches of a fallen tree. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a child's jacket, caked with mud but otherwise intact. Something about finding children's clothing in such a remote location unsettled them enough to report it to the park ranger. The ranger, who had previously worked in law enforcement, recognized the potential significance and immediately contacted the FBI. The jacket was carefully documented and collected as potential evidence. The FBI ran the description through their database of missing children cases and quickly connected it to Ethan Winters. When shown photographs, Sarah immediately identified it as the blue jacket Ethan had worn on the day of his disappearance. The discovery electrified the investigation. Blackwater National Forest spanned thousands of acres of dense woodland across 2 states. It was a popular destination for hikers and campers during the warmer months, but the area where the jacket was found was off the main trails, in a section rarely visited even during peak season. The location raised disturbing questions. How had Ethan's jacket ended up so far from where he disappeared? Had he been taken there, or had the jacket been deliberately planted to mislead investigators? And why would it suddenly appear now, 8 months later? A massive search operation was launched in the forest. FBI agents, state police, park rangers, and volunteers combed the area surrounding where the jacket had been found. Cadaver dogs were brought in, a step the authorities had been reluctant to take previously, but now deemed necessary. The Winters family watched from the sidelines, hope and dread warring within them as the search intensified. Sarah clung to the belief that finding the jacket meant they were getting closer to finding Ethan alive. James prepared himself for a different outcome, though he kept these thoughts from his wife. The forest search yielded no body, no remains, no further clothing or belongings. This was both a relief and a frustration. The only additional evidence uncovered was a small campsite about half a mile from where the jacket was found. It appeared to have been abandoned months earlier, with the remains of a tent, a fire pit, and various discarded items suggesting someone had stayed there for an extended period. There was no definitive link to Ethan, but the timing aligned with his disappearance. The forest discovery brought renewed media attention to the case. The 8-month marker, the mysterious appearance of the jacket, and the dramatic search of the National Forest made for compelling headlines. Sarah seized the opportunity to appeal directly to the public once more, her face thinner now, lined with months of worry, but her voice still steady as she implored anyone with information to come forward. The renewed publicity had an unexpected effect. Tips began pouring in, most leading nowhere, but one stood out. A gas station attendant from a small town near the edge of Blackwater Forest called the hotline, claiming to remember a man and a boy who had stopped at his station in the weeks following Ethan's disappearance. The boy had matched Ethan's description, though the attendant hadn't made the connection at the time. He described the man as middle-aged, with a beard and a distinctive limp. Most importantly, he remembered the license plate of their truck, partial information, but enough for investigators to work with. The license plate information led to a vehicle registered to a man named Robert Harding. When investigators ran his name through their databases, alarm bells sounded. Harding had a previous conviction for child endangerment from 15 years earlier in another state. He had served his time and completed probation, but the connection was too significant to ignore. Records showed that Harding now owned a cabin about 20 miles from where Ethan's jacket had been found. A background check revealed something else. Robert Harding had worked as a substitute bus driver for the Pinecrest School District during the previous school year. He would have had access to information about the field trip schedule. He would have known which children were in which classes. He would have had the opportunity to observe Ethan, perhaps even interact with him, long before the museum visit. Armed with this information, the FBI obtained a warrant to search Harding's cabin. When they arrived, they found it abandoned, with evidence suggesting Harding had left in a hurry. There were food items still in the refrigerator, clothes in the drawers, and his truck was gone. Inside the cabin, investigators found something that turned the case from disturbing to horrifying. A hidden room accessed through a concealed door in the back of a closet. The room contained a small bed, a few toys, and drawings pinned to the wall. Several of the drawings were signed Ethan in a child's handwriting. Fingerprint analysis later confirmed they matched prints from Ethan's bedroom. The implications were clear and chilling. Ethan had been taken to this cabin and held there for some period of time. But where was he now? And where was Robert Harding? A nationwide manhunt was launched for Harding and his vehicle. His photograph was shared across all media platforms, and tip lines were inundated with potential sightings. The Winters family was placed under police protection in case Harding attempted to contact or threaten them. For Sarah, the evidence found in the cabin represented a complex emotional turmoil. It was the proof she had been right all along. Ethan had survived the initial disappearance. He had been alive, at least for some time afterward. But it also forced her to confront the nightmare scenario she had pushed away for months, that her son had been in the hands of a predator with unknown intentions. James found himself in the surreal position of hoping that Ethan was still being held captive because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. Emma, now 9, was kept away from the news as much as possible, but she understood enough to know that bad things might have happened to her brother. The search for Robert Harding intensified over the following days. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states coordinated their efforts. Border patrols were alerted in case he attempted to flee the country. His financial records were scrutinized for clues about where he might go. Then, 5 days after the discovery of the cabin, a state trooper in Montana spotted Harding's truck at a remote rest stop near the Canadian border. What followed was a tense standoff as Harding, cornered and desperate, initially refused to surrender. After hours of negotiations, he finally emerged from his vehicle and was taken into custody. The first question on everyone's mind: where was Ethan? Initially, Harding refused to speak without a lawyer present. The investigators, the Winters family, and the entire community held their breath, waiting for information about Ethan's fate. The turning point came when Harding's court-appointed attorney, recognizing the gravity of the situation, convinced him that cooperation was his only option if he wanted any leniency from the court. 3 days after his arrest, Harding finally revealed where Ethan could be found, but his statement brought a new wave of complications. According to Harding, he had indeed taken Ethan from the museum using a maintenance uniform he had obtained through his previous job connections to blend in and access restricted areas. He had kept Ethan at his cabin for nearly 7 months, but he insisted that Ethan had not been harmed physically, claiming instead that he had rescued the boy from his family for reasons that made sense only in Harding's disturbed mind. Most critically, Harding claimed that approximately 1 month before his jacket was found, Ethan had escaped the cabin during a supply run. Harding said he had searched for days but never found him. He believed Ethan was still somewhere in or near Blackwater Forest. This revelation transformed the investigation once again. If Harding was telling the truth, and investigators were skeptical given his history of deception, Ethan might have been alone in the wilderness for over a month during harsh winter conditions. The thought was both hopeful and terrifying. Ethan was alive more recently than they had dared to believe, but surviving alone in the forest during winter would be challenging even for an experienced adult, let alone a child. A new search was launched, more intensive than before, focusing on shelters, cabins, and areas where a child might seek refuge. Specialists in wilderness survival and search and rescue joined the effort. The FBI brought in experts who specialized in interviewing predators, hoping to extract more detailed information from Harding about Ethan's possible location. The community rallied once more, with volunteers arriving from across the country to join the search efforts. Maps of the forest were distributed, areas were assigned, and a methodical grid search began, covering every acre surrounding Harding's cabin and extending outward. Sarah and James Winters maintained a presence at the command center, Sarah still clinging to hope, James supporting her, while privately preparing for heartbreak. 7 days into the renewed search, as temperatures dropped and snow began to fall, diminishing hopes of finding Ethan alive, a breakthrough finally came. A search team checking abandoned hunting cabins in the eastern section of the forest radioed in with news that would change everything. They had found a child, alive but weak, sheltering in a seasonal cabin nearly 15 miles from Harding's property. The boy identified himself as Ethan Winters. The moment Sarah and James received the news remains etched in the memory of everyone present at the command center. Sarah collapsed to her knees, a primal sound somewhere between a sob and a scream escaping her. James stood frozen, unable to process the words he had both longed for and feared would never come. Within hours, they were reunited with their son in a hospital 30 miles from the forest. Ethan was severely malnourished, suffering from exposure and frostbite on several fingers and toes. His hair had grown long and matted, his skin was pale from months without adequate sunlight, and there was a wariness in his eyes that had not been there before. But he was alive. The doctors confirmed that while Ethan would need extensive physical and psychological treatment, his prognosis for recovery was good. In the days that followed, as Ethan's strength gradually returned, the full story began to emerge. Harding had indeed taken him from the museum, using a maintenance uniform and his knowledge of the building's blind spots to avoid detection. He had told Ethan that his parents had sent him, that there was an emergency, and they needed to leave immediately through a side exit. Only once they were driving away did Ethan realize something was wrong, but by then it was too late. Harding had kept Ethan isolated in the cabin for months, allowing him limited access to the rest of the property. He had provided food, some education, and had not physically abused him, but the psychological trauma of captivity had left deep scars. Ethan confirmed Harding's claim about the escape. He had managed to slip away while Harding was unloading supplies from his truck. He had taken nothing but the clothes on his back, losing his jacket during his flight through the forest. For weeks he had survived by moving from one abandoned seasonal cabin to another, foraging what food he could find, and using survival skills he had learned partly from his father's teaching and partly from books Harding had provided during his captivity. The case against Robert Harding was airtight. In addition to Ethan's testimony and the evidence found in the cabin, investigators discovered journals detailing Harding's obsession with saving children he perceived as neglected or in danger, based on criteria that existed only in his mind. He had apparently been observing Ethan for months before the abduction, convinced by some twisted logic that he was rescuing the boy from harm. Harding was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and numerous other offenses. He would eventually be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Winters family, the journey towards healing would be long and complex. Ethan required extensive therapy to process his trauma. There were nightmares, panic attacks, and moments when he would retreat into himself, unreachable even to those who loved him most. Sarah took an extended leave from her job to be with him constantly during the early months of his recovery. James worked with the school to develop a gradual reintegration plan that would allow Ethan to resume his education at a pace he could manage. Emma, who had maintained a shrine to her brother in their shared playroom during his absence, now had to relearn how to interact with a brother who had been fundamentally changed by his ordeal. The media interest in Ethan's return was intense. Reporters camped outside their home, hoping for interviews or photographs. The Winters family initially declined all requests, focusing solely on Ethan's recovery. Later, when Ethan felt ready, they agreed to a single interview with a respected journalist who had covered the case compassionately throughout. The interview, broadcast nationally, offered closure to the thousands who had followed Ethan's story and participated in the search. It also served as a platform for the family to advocate for improved security measures for children and resources for families of missing persons. As months passed, the Winters family began to find a new normal. They relocated to a different neighborhood, seeking privacy and a fresh start. They established the Ethan Winters Foundation, dedicated to supporting the families of missing children and funding technological advances in search and rescue operations. Most importantly, they focused on rebuilding their family bonds, understanding that while the physical search for Ethan had ended, the journey toward emotional healing was ongoing. Ethan's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience. It reminds us of the vulnerabilities in systems designed to protect our children and the need for constant vigilance. It highlights the devastation caused by individuals who justify harmful actions through distorted thinking. But it also demonstrates the extraordinary strength of a child determined to survive, a family refusing to give up hope, and a community coming together in the face of tragedy. In the 3 years since Ethan's return, he has gradually reclaimed elements of his former self. His interest in science, temporarily buried beneath the weight of trauma, has re-emerged. He has made new friends, though he remains more reserved than before. He still avoids crowded places and has never returned to the Lakeside Museum. The physical scars from his frostbite have faded, but occasionally he still wakes in the night, convinced he is back in the forest, alone and afraid. In these moments, the presence of his family reminds him that he is home, that the nightmare is over. If you or someone you know has information about a missing child, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at the number below. No lead is too small, no detail insignificant. As Ethan's case demonstrates, hope endures even in the darkest circumstances, and sometimes, against all odds, lost children find their way home. Remember to like and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of mysterious disappearances and miraculous returns. Share this video to spread awareness about child safety and the importance of community involvement in search efforts. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep hope alive.